My son got married without telling me. I found out when I saw their wedding photos online. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that money can thin even the strongest bloodlines. My name is Marcus Sterling, and if you've never heard of me, you haven't been paying attention to the business world for the past 30 years. I built Sterling Industries from absolutely nothing, and when I say nothing, I mean I started with $57 in my pocket and a borrowed suit that was 2 sizes too big. Back in 1994, I was sleeping on a friend's couch in Detroit, making cold calls from a payphone outside a gas station. The rejection was brutal. Door after door slammed in my face. Phone calls that ended with dial tones before I could finish my pitch. There were nights I went to bed hungry, wondering if I was chasing an impossible dream. But here's what separates winners from quitters. I never stopped believing that success was just one more call away. One more meeting. One more chance to prove that Marcus Sterling wasn't going to fade into the background like all the other dreamers who gave up when things got tough. The breakthrough came when I landed my first major client, a small manufacturing company that needed someone desperate enough to work for peanuts. I was that someone. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I learned their business better than they knew it themselves. Within 6 months, I'd saved them $200,000 in operational costs. Within a year, they recommended me to 3 other companies. That's how empires are born, not with grand gestures or lucky breaks, but with relentless, grinding determination that most people don't have the stomach for. By 2000, Sterling Industries was handling logistics for half the manufacturing companies in the Midwest. By 2010, we'd expanded into real estate development, technology consulting, and financial services. Today, we're worth $23 billion, and I control every single decision that matters. But money was never the point. The point was proving that a kid from the wrong side of Detroit could build something that would last forever. Something that would carry the Sterling name long after I'm gone. Something I could pass down to my son, David Sterling. From the moment he could walk, I knew he was destined to inherit everything I'd built. He had my eyes, sharp, calculating, always looking for the angle others missed. As a child, he'd sit in the corner of my office during meetings, quietly absorbing every word. While other kids his age were playing video games, David was learning about profit margins and market positioning. I sent him to the best schools money could buy. Harvard Business School. A year studying international markets in London. Internships at competitor companies where he could learn their weaknesses. Every opportunity one never had, I made sure David got. When he joined Sterling Industries at 25, I watched him climb the ranks faster than any other employee in company history. Not because of his last name, I made sure of that, but because he was genuinely brilliant. He could spot inefficiencies that seasoned executives missed. He could negotiate deals that left both sides feeling like they'd won. By 30, David was my vice president of strategic development. By 32, he was being groomed as my successor. The board loved him. Our investors trusted him. Wall Street analysts called him the heir apparent to one of America's most successful business dynasties. I was proud. Prouder than I'd ever been of anything in my life. But looking back now, I realize I was also blind. There were warning signs I chose to ignore. Small things that seemed insignificant at the time. David's fascination with shortcuts, for instance. He was always looking for ways to get results faster, even if it meant cutting corners on processes I'd spent years perfecting. "Dad, we could save 6 months on this project if we just bypassed the environmental impact study," he'd say during planning meetings. "Son, we do things the right way, even if it takes longer," I'd respond. "That's why Sterling Industries has never had a major scandal." He'd nod and smile, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. Then there was his obsession with expanding our influence. Not just growing the business, that was natural, but specifically targeting companies and politicians who could give us unfair advantages over competitors. "We need to be more aggressive," he'd argue. "Other companies are playing dirty, and we're losing opportunities by staying clean. We don't need to be like other companies," I'd tell him. "We win by being better, not by being sneakier." But David was hungry for power in a way that worried me. He wasn't content to build slowly and steadily like I had. He wanted everything, and he wanted it now. The biggest red flag was his attitude toward money itself. I'd worked so hard to earn every dollar that I never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. But David had grown up rich. To him, money wasn't something you earned, it was something you were entitled to. "Why shouldn't we use every advantage available to us?" he'd ask when I'd refused to participate in some questionable business practice. "We have the resources. We have the connections. Not using them is just stupid." I told myself these were growing pains. That he was young and ambitious, and that experience would teach him the value of integrity over quick profits. I believed that when the time came for him to take over Sterling Industries, he'd understand why I'd built the company on principles rather than just profit. I was wrong. The truth is, while I was busy building an empire for my son, I forgot to make sure my son was worthy of inheriting it. I gave him everything except the one thing that mattered most, the understanding that true success isn't measured by how much you can take, but by how much you can build without destroying others. Now, as I sit in my penthouse office overlooking the city I helped shape, I can see the cracks in the foundation I thought was solid. Not in Sterling Industries. The company is stronger than ever. The cracks are in the relationship between a father who sacrificed everything to build a legacy and a son who was willing to sacrifice anything to claim it. I just didn't know how deep those cracks ran until the morning I discovered David's wedding photos online. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That moment of betrayal, the moment that changed everything, deserves its own chapter in this story. Because what I found that morning wasn't just evidence of a secret wedding. It was proof that my own son had been planning to destroy everything I'd spent my life building. And he was using my greatest enemy to do it. It was a Tuesday morning in March when my world collapsed. I remember the exact date, March 15th, because it felt like my own personal Ides of Caesar moment. I was sitting in my office at 6:30 a.m., coffee still steaming in my favorite mug, scanning through the usual morning routine of market reports and industry news. That's when I decided to check social media. I rarely bothered with Facebook or Instagram. They seemed like wastes of time for serious businessmen. But my assistant had been insisting I needed to maintain a digital presence for Sterling Industries. So there I was, scrolling through LinkedIn updates about quarterly earnings and corporate mergers, when I saw it. A notification that made my blood freeze. David Sterling tagged in 47 photos. My finger hovered over the link. David had always been private about his personal life, especially lately. For the past 6 months, he'd been traveling frequently, claiming he was exploring new market opportunities in California. I trusted him completely. After all, he was my son and my chosen successor. What reason would I have to doubt him? I clicked the link. The first photo nearly stopped my heart. David, wearing a pristine white tuxedo, standing on a beach at sunset. His arm was wrapped around a woman in an elegant wedding dress, a woman I'd never seen before. They were both smiling with the kind of joy that comes from sharing the most important moment of your life. My son had gotten married. Without telling me. Without inviting me. I stared at the screen, wondering if I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. This couldn't be real. David wouldn't do this. Not to me. Not after everything we built together. But as I scrolled through photo after photo, the ceremony, the reception, the dancing, the cake cutting, the reality became undeniable. My only son, the heir to my empire, had chosen to exclude me from the single most important day of his life. The woman was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde, sophisticated, with the kind of confident smile that comes from growing up with money. But who was she? Where had David met her? Why hadn't he ever mentioned her to me? I found my answer in the photo captions. Congratulations to David Sterling and Isabella Hale on their beautiful wedding. Hale. The name hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I read it again, certain I was mistaken. But there it was, clear as day, Isabella Hale. My hand started shaking as the full horror of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about David getting married without telling me. This was about him marrying into the one family I'd specifically warned him to stay away from his entire life. Richard Hale. That name still made my jaw clench with rage, even after all these years. Most people in the business world today don't remember the war between Sterling Industries and Hale Corporation in the early 2000s, but I'll never forget it. Hale tried to destroy me when I was still building my company. It started as a simple competition for a major government contract, worth about $50 million at the time. Sterling Industries had worked for months on the proposal. We had the better bid, the superior track record, and the more innovative approach. The contract should have been ours. But Richard Hale didn't believe in fair competition. 3 days before the final presentation, I discovered that someone had been feeding our confidential bid information to Hale Corporation. Not just the numbers, our entire strategy, our pricing model, even our presentation timeline. Hale had used our own work to undercut us. When I confronted him at an industry conference, Hale just smiled that cold, arrogant smile of his. "Business is war, Sterling," he said. "Don't blame me for being better at it than you are." "Better at it?" I shot back. "You mean better at cheating?" "I mean better at winning," he replied. "Something you'll need to get used to losing." But I didn't lose. I couldn't afford to lose. Instead, I spent the next 2 years systematically outmaneuvering Hale at every turn. When he bid on projects, I found ways to bid lower without sacrificing quality. When he tried to poach my clients, I strengthened those relationships with better service. When he attempted to spread rumors about Sterling Industries' reliability, I let our work speak for itself. Eventually, Hale Corporation was forced to retreat from several markets where they couldn't compete with us. Richard Hale's arrogance had cost him millions of dollars and damaged his reputation throughout the industry. "Stay away from the Hale family," I'd told David when he was old enough to understand. "They're snakes. They'll smile to your face while they're poisoning you from behind." David had nodded and promised he understood. He'd seemed to take the lesson to heart. Apparently, he'd lied. Now, staring at these wedding photos, I felt 20 years of carefully controlled anger boiling over. How could David do this to me? How could he marry into the family of the man who tried to destroy everything I'd worked for? But as I continued scrolling through the photos, looking for clues about when and where this wedding had taken place, a worse realization began to dawn on me. In several pictures, I could see Richard Hale himself. He was standing right next to David, smiling like they were old friends. In one photo, he had his hand on David's shoulder in a gesture that looked almost paternal. My son wasn't just marrying a Hale. He was being welcomed into their family like he was the son Richard had always wanted. The son Richard was going to use to finally get his revenge on me. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my empire brick by brick. For 30 years, I'd protected Sterling Industries from threats, competitors, and anyone who wanted to tear down what I'd created. I'd never imagined that the biggest threat would come from inside my own family. But as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across my office, I realized this wasn't just about a secret wedding. This was about something much more dangerous. This was war. I spent the next 3 hours doing something I hadn't done in 20 years, conducting surveillance on my own son. Every photo, every comment, every tagged location from that wedding became a piece of evidence in a puzzle I was terrified to solve. The wedding had taken place 6 weeks ago in Napa Valley, California. Not some small, intimate ceremony, but a lavish affair with over 200 guests. I recognized faces from the photos, business leaders, politicians, even some of my own clients. People who knew exactly who David Sterling was, and who his father was, and yet none of them had thought to mention seeing my son get married. That told me everything I needed to know about how carefully this had been planned. I dug deeper into Isabella's social media profiles. She wasn't just any Hale family member. She was Richard's only daughter, his pride and joy, and according to her LinkedIn profile, she held an MBA from Stanford and currently served as Director of Strategic Partnerships at Hale Corporation. Strategic partnerships. The irony was almost laughable. But the real punch to the gut came when I started analyzing the timeline. David's business trips to California over the past 8 months suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been exploring new markets, he'd been courting the enemy's daughter. Every time he'd looked me in the eye and told me he was working to expand Sterling Industries' West Coast presence, he'd been lying. I pulled up David's expense reports from the company database. Dinners at 5-star restaurants. Weekend stays at luxury resorts. Flights that coincidentally aligned with Isabella's travel schedule, which I could piece together from her Instagram posts. Sterling Industries had been funding my son's romantic pursuit of Richard Hale's daughter. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. But it was about to get worse. I called my head of security, Tom Martinez, a former FBI agent who'd been with Sterling Industries for 12 years. Tom, I need you to pull together everything you can find about David's activities over the past year. Phone records, credit card statements, travel patterns, everything. Sir, is there a problem? There might be. How quickly can you get me that information? Give me 2 hours. Those were the longest 2 hours of my life. I sat in my office, staring at David's empty chair across from my desk, wondering how I could have been so blind. Every board meeting where he'd pushed for more aggressive expansion. Every suggestion about modernizing our business practices. Every time he'd questioned my conservative approach to growth. Had it all been preparation for this moment? When Tom returned with a thick folder of documents, my worst fears were confirmed. Mr. Sterling, I think you need to see this, he said, spreading papers across my desk. These are printouts of text messages between David and someone listed in his phone as R.H. Richard Hale. My son had been communicating directly with my greatest enemy for over a year. The messages were carefully worded, but the implications were clear. David, the old man is finally starting to trust me with the bigger decisions. R.H. Patience. Everything we've discussed depends on timing. David, the board meeting next month could be perfect. He's planning to announce the succession timeline. R.H. Isabella is excited about the wedding. After that, we'll be family. Real family. David. He still doesn't suspect anything. Honestly, I think he's getting senile. That last line felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Senile. My own son thought I was losing my edge. But the final message in the chain was the one that made everything crystal clear. R.H. Once you're officially running Sterling Industries, we can begin the merger discussions. Imagine, Hale Sterling Corporation. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? David. I've been imagining it for months. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the floor. For several minutes, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The magnitude of the betrayal was overwhelming. This wasn't just about a secret wedding. It wasn't even just about David choosing the Hale family over his own father. This was a coup. Richard Hale had spent 20 years plotting his revenge against me, and he'd found the perfect weapon, my own son. While I'd been grooming David to inherit Sterling Industries, Hale had been grooming David to hand it over. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a merger announcement. I thought about all the times David had pushed me to step back, to delegate more responsibility to him. His suggestions about updating our corporate structure. His recommendations for new board members who would be more forward-thinking. He hadn't been trying to modernize the company. He'd been trying to position himself to sell it. The worst part was realizing how perfectly Hale had played this game. He couldn't destroy Sterling Industries from the outside, so he'd turned my heir against me. He'd used David's ambition, his impatience, his hunger for power, and turned it into a weapon aimed directly at my heart. And David had let him. My son had looked me in the eye every day for months, knowing he was planning to betray everything I'd built. He'd sat in board meetings, discussing 5-year plans and growth strategies, knowing he intended to hand it all over to the man who tried to ruin me. I picked up the scattered papers with trembling hands, my mind racing through the implications. If David officially inherited Sterling Industries, he'd have the authority to make decisions that could destroy the company from within. He could sell assets, restructure debt, even merge with Hale Corporation without my consent. Everything I'd sacrificed for. Everything I'd built. Everything I'd planned to leave as my legacy. Gone. But as I sat there in my office, surrounded by evidence of my son's betrayal, something cold and calculating settled into my chest. Richard Hale had made one crucial mistake in his perfect plan. He'd underestimated me. David might think I was getting senile, but I hadn't survived 30 years in cutthroat business by being weak or naive. I'd built Sterling Industries by being smarter, more ruthless, and more determined than anyone who tried to destroy me. Richard Hale was about to learn that lesson all over again. And this time, my own son was going to learn it with him. The old Marcus Sterling would have confronted David immediately. Would have stormed into his office, thrown those text messages on his desk, and demanded an explanation. Would have let rage and hurt drive his decisions. But I didn't become worth $23 billion by making emotional choices. I became successful by thinking 10 moves ahead while my opponents were still celebrating their first victory. So I did nothing. At least, nothing that David or Richard Hale could see. When David returned from his honeymoon in Italy, another expense Sterling Industries had unknowingly funded, I greeted him with a warm smile and congratulations on his marriage. I played the role of the surprised but supportive father perfectly. "I wish you'd told me, son," I said, embracing him in my office. "But I understand young people want their privacy." Isabella seems lovely from the photos I saw. David looked genuinely shocked that I wasn't furious. "Dad, I know I should have invited you. It happened so fast, and we wanted something small and intimate." "Of course," I said, patting his shoulder. "What matters is that you're happy. When do I get to meet my new daughter-in-law properly?" The relief in his eyes was almost heartbreaking. He actually thought I was buying his story. That I was just a sentimental old man who could be managed with a few kind words and explanations. "How about dinner this Friday? Isabella's excited to meet you." "Perfect," I replied. "I'm looking forward to it." What I didn't tell David was that while he'd been honeymooning in Tuscany, I'd been busy restructuring the entire foundation of Sterling Industries. I started with the legal framework. My attorney, Sarah Chin, had been with me for 15 years and understood that some conversations required absolute discretion. I asked her to create a new entity, Sterling Holdings, that would technically own all the assets currently held by Sterling Industries. "This is a significant restructure, Marcus," she warned me during a late-night meeting at her office. "Are you sure about this timing?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I told her. "How long will it take?" 6 weeks if we rush it. But the board will need to approve any major corporate restructuring. Let me worry about the board. The board meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday in May, exactly what Richard Hale's text messages had referenced as David's opportunity to announce the succession timeline. What they didn't know was that I'd already scheduled individual meetings with each board member over the next month. I started with Patricia Williams, our longest-serving board member and the most influential voice after mine. Patricia had built her own marketing empire before joining Sterling Industries, and she understood the value of loyalty. "Patricia, I need to discuss something with you in complete confidence," I said over lunch at her favorite restaurant. "I have reason to believe there might be some irregularities in our succession planning." I didn't show her the text messages, not yet. But I planted enough doubt to make her start asking her own questions about David's recent behavior and suggestions. Next was James Rodriguez, our former military officer who now handled our government contracts. James valued honor above everything else. When I mentioned my concerns about potential conflicts of interest regarding the Hale family, his expression darkened. "You think David's been compromised?" he asked directly. "I think David's been influenced," I replied carefully. "And I need board members who will put Sterling Industries first, regardless of family relationships." One by one, I worked through each board member. I didn't lie to any of them, but I guided their thinking toward the conclusions I needed them to reach. By the time I finished, I had 6 of the 9 board members questioning David's readiness to take over the company. While I was securing the board, I was also quietly restructuring our financial assets. The beauty of owning your own company is that you have legitimate reasons to move money around. I began consolidating our most valuable assets under Sterling Holdings, technically removing them from David's eventual reach. The real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, the intellectual property rights, the subsidiary companies that generated most of our actual profit. All of it moved into a structure that David would never be able to access, no matter what authority he thought he'd inherited. But my masterpiece was what I did with our partnership agreements. Sterling Industries had contracts with dozens of major corporations, deals that David would need to honor if he took over the company. What he didn't realize was that many of these contracts contained clauses that allowed termination if there was a material change in corporate ownership or control. I spent 3 weeks quietly contacting our major partners, explaining that Sterling Industries was undergoing some internal restructuring, and recommending they exercise their right to renegotiate contracts with Sterling Holdings instead. The companies that mattered, the ones that generated serious revenue, agreed to the transition. What would be left for David were the smaller, less profitable contracts that wouldn't be enough to sustain a major corporation. During all of this, David continued to work beside me, completely unaware that I was systematically dismantling his inheritance. He attended meetings where we discussed the May board meeting and his increased responsibilities. He made suggestions about corporate strategy that I nodded along with, knowing they would never be implemented. The hardest part was watching him lie to my face every single day. "Dad, I've been thinking about our West Coast expansion," he'd say during our weekly strategy sessions. "I think we should be more aggressive about pursuing partnerships with established companies out there. Companies like Hale Corporation, no doubt." "That's interesting, son. Tell me more about what you have in mind." He'd outlined his vision, which I now recognize as a roadmap for the eventual merger with Hale, and I'd take notes, ask thoughtful questions, and praise his strategic thinking. All while knowing that none of it would ever happen. The Friday dinner with Isabella went exactly as I'd expected. She was charming, intelligent, and clearly tasked with winning me over. She asked thoughtful questions about Sterling Industries' history, complimented my business acumen, and even shared some amusing stories about her own work in strategic partnerships. "I hope David and I can contribute to Sterling Industries' continued success," she said over dessert, her hand resting on David's arm. "Family businesses are so special when everyone works together toward the same goals." "Absolutely," I agreed, raising my wine glass in a toast. "To family. And to making sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve." David beamed at me, thinking he'd successfully managed the situation. Isabella smiled warmly, believing she'd charmed the old man. Neither of them understood that I'd just declared war. And unlike 20 years ago, this time I held all the weapons. The Sterling Industries annual shareholders meeting was always held the second Tuesday in May at the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel. 200 of the most powerful investors, business leaders, and financial journalists in the country would gather to hear about our performance and future plans. This year's meeting was supposed to be David's coronation. For weeks, he'd been preparing his presentation about Sterling Industries, the next generation. He'd practiced his speech dozens of times, refining his vision for the company's future. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing my own presentation. One that would end his dreams forever. The morning of the meeting, David arrived at my office earlier than usual, clearly nervous but excited. "Dad, I've been thinking about the announcement today. Maybe we should frame it as a gradual transition rather than an immediate handover?" I looked up from the documents I was reviewing, documents he would never see coming. "Son, today isn't about gradual anything. Today is about truth." Something in my tone made him pause. "What do you mean?" "You'll understand soon enough." "Are you ready to face the music?" David laughed uncertainly. "You're being dramatic, Dad. It's just a shareholders' meeting." "Is it?" I stood up and straightened my tie. "Well, let's go find out." The ballroom was packed. I spotted Richard Hale sitting in the third row, looking confident and relaxed. He'd flown in from Los Angeles specifically for this meeting, no doubt expecting to witness the moment his 20-year plan finally succeeded. Isabella sat beside him, wearing a navy blue dress that screamed, "Corporate daughter-in-law." She gave me a warm wave when our eyes met, still playing the role of the devoted new family member. David took his seat at the head table, his presentation folder neatly organized beside him. He had no idea that I'd spent the previous evening making some last-minute changes to the meeting agenda. "Good morning, everyone," I began, stepping up to the podium. "Thank you for joining us for Sterling Industries' annual shareholders meeting. I know many of you are expecting to hear about succession planning and leadership transitions today." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. David nodded encouragingly, his confident smile never wavering. "But before we discuss the future," I continued, "I think it's important to address some recent developments that have come to my attention. Developments that directly impact this company's leadership structure." Now David looked confused. This wasn't part of the script we'd discussed. I clicked the remote in my hand, and the massive screen behind me lit up with a projection. Not David's carefully prepared slides about growth strategies and innovation. Instead, the screen showed a text message conversation. "David, the old man is finally starting to trust me with the bigger decisions. RH. Patience. Everything we've discussed depends on timing." A gasp went through the audience. David's face went white as he realized what he was seeing. In the third row, Richard Hale's confident expression transformed into something approaching panic. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom, "I'd like you to meet the future leadership team that my son David has been planning for Sterling Industries." I clicked again. More messages appeared. RH. Once you're officially running Sterling Industries, we can begin the merger discussions. Imagine, Hale Sterling Corporation. David. I've been imagining it for months. The room erupted. Shareholders began talking urgently to each other. Journalists started scribbling notes, frantically. Camera flashes went off as photographers captured David's horrified expression. "You see," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos, "while I was planning to announce my son's promotion to CEO today, David was planning to announce something quite different. He was planning to sell Sterling Industries to the Hale Corporation." David shot to his feet. "Dad, stop! You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, clicking to the next slide. This one showed financial documents. "I understand that my son has been feeding confidential company information to Richard Hale for over a year. I understand that his marriage to Isabella Hale was a business arrangement designed to facilitate a corporate takeover. And I understand that David believed I was too old and too trusting to see what was happening right under my nose." The cameras were now focused on Richard Hale, who was trying to make his way toward the exit. But hotel security, which I'd briefed earlier, blocked his path. "The good news," I continued, "is that Sterling Industries will continue to thrive under new leadership. Effective immediately, I'm announcing the appointment of Patricia Williams as our new CEO, with James Rodriguez as Chief Operating Officer." Patricia stood up from her seat in the front row, nodding to the crowd. She'd known this moment was coming for 3 weeks. "Furthermore," I said, "all assets currently held by Sterling Industries have been transferred to Sterling Holdings, a new entity that will ensure our company's independence and integrity for generations to come." David was staring at me with a mixture of shock, rage, and dawning understanding. "You knew," he whispered, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "You knew all along." "I knew the moment I saw your wedding photos online," I replied. "The photos from the wedding you didn't invite me to. The wedding that was supposed to be your first step toward destroying everything I'd built." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word of this family drama playing out in real time. "David Sterling," I continued, looking directly at my son, "you are hereby removed from all positions within Sterling Industries and Sterling Holdings. Your corporate access has been revoked, your company credit cards have been cancelled, and your inheritance has been permanently restructured." Isabella had tears streaming down her face. Whether from embarrassment, rage, or genuine sadness, I couldn't tell. "Richard Hale," I said, turning to face my old enemy. I believe you have some explaining to do to your own shareholders about why you've been plotting corporate espionage instead of focusing on your own company's performance. Richard's face was purple with fury. This isn't over, Sterling! He shouted as security escorted him toward the exit. Yes, I said quietly into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, it is. As the room exploded into chaos, journalists rushing toward phones, shareholders demanding answers, board members trying to restore order, I looked at David one last time. My son. My heir. My greatest disappointment. He was staring at me with hate in his eyes, and I realized that any chance of reconciliation had just died in this ballroom. But Sterling Industries would survive. And sometimes that has to be enough. 6 months after the shareholders' meeting that destroyed my relationship with my son, I sit in my penthouse office watching the financial news with a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness that I never expected to feel. The headlines tell the story better than I ever could. Hale Corporation files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Former Sterling heir David Sterling faces federal investigation for corporate espionage. Sterling Holdings reports record quarterly profits under new leadership. The dominoes fell exactly as I'd planned them to, but faster than even I had anticipated. Richard Hale's empire collapsed within 4 months of that shareholders' meeting. It turns out that while he'd been focused on destroying me, he neglected some serious problems in his own company. Hidden debts that he'd been covering up with creative accounting. Environmental violations at 3 of his manufacturing plants. Tax irregularities that the IRS became very interested in once I'd provided them with some helpful documentation. I won't pretend I didn't help accelerate his downfall. When you've been in business as long as I have, you develop certain relationships with regulatory agencies, investigative journalists, and competing companies who might be interested in acquiring distressed assets at bargain prices. Hale Corporation's bankruptcy was officially caused by overleveraging and market volatility. Unofficially, it was caused by Marcus Sterling methodically exposing every weakness in Richard Hale's business model until the whole structure collapsed under its own corruption. Richard himself disappeared from public view after losing his company. The last I heard, he'd moved to some small town in Montana, trying to rebuild his life away from the business world that no longer wanted anything to do with him. Isabella filed for divorce from David 3 weeks after her father's company went under. Apparently, being married to a disgraced heir to a fortune he could no longer access wasn't quite the strategic partnership she'd signed up for. The divorce was messy and public. Isabella's lawyers tried to claim that David had misrepresented his financial situation, while David's lawyers argued that Isabella had married him under false pretenses as part of a corporate conspiracy. Both sides were right. David himself has become something of a cautionary tale in business circles. The federal investigation into corporate espionage charges is still ongoing, though my lawyers assure me that the evidence we provided will likely result in serious jail time. His reputation in the business world is permanently destroyed. No major corporation will touch him, and the venture capital firms that might have overlooked his past won't go near someone under federal investigation. Last week, I heard through industry contacts that David had taken a job as a middle manager at a small logistics company in Phoenix. The salary is probably less than what he used to spend on weekend trips. Patricia Williams has exceeded my expectations as CEO of Sterling Holdings. Our profits are up 37%, we've expanded into 3 new markets, and our stock price has reached an all-time high. The business press calls her the strategic mastermind who saved Sterling Industries from internal destruction. She's been kind enough never to point out that I was the one who nearly let it be destroyed in the first place. James Rodriguez has proven equally capable as COO. His military background brings a level of discipline and strategic thinking that's transformed our operations. Between Patricia's vision and James's execution, Sterling Holdings is stronger than it's ever been. But success feels different when you're experiencing it alone. I thought revenge would be sweeter. For months, I'd imagined the moment when David would realize how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. I'd fantasized about Richard Hale's humiliation when his carefully laid plans crumbled around him. Those moments happen exactly as I'd envisioned them. But what I didn't anticipate was the hollowness that came afterward. The empire survives. Thrives even. But what's the point of building a dynasty when you no longer have anyone to pass it on to? I've been thinking about that a lot lately, especially in the evenings when I'm alone in this penthouse that was supposed to house generations of Sterlings. I built all of this for David. Every sacrifice, every 18-hour workday, every difficult decision was made with the vision of handing him something magnificent. Now he's gone, and I'm left with the uncomfortable realization that I might have created my own tragedy. Could I have handled things differently? Could I have tried to understand why David felt the need to ally himself with Richard Hale instead of simply working within the system I'd created for him? Maybe. But understanding doesn't change what he chose to do. It doesn't change the fact that he was willing to destroy everything I'd built for his own gain. David made his choice when he decided to betray me. I just made sure that choice had consequences. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he thinks about me. If he regrets what he threw away. If he understands that he could have had everything legitimately, but chose to try to steal it instead. Then I remember the hatred in his eyes during that shareholders' meeting, and I realize that David probably blames me for destroying his life rather than accepting responsibility for destroying ours. The phone on my desk shows 17 missed calls from journalists wanting to interview me about the Sterling succession scandal. They want to know how it feels to destroy your own son's life. They want to understand the psychology of a father who chose business over blood. I don't answer their calls because I don't have an answer that would satisfy them. The truth is both simpler and more complex than they could understand. I didn't choose business over blood. I chose integrity over betrayal. I chose the principles that built Sterling Industries over the son who tried to sell them. David is still my son. He always will be. But he's no longer my heir. Sterling Holdings will continue long after I'm gone, led by people who understand that some things are more important than family loyalty. Even if that knowledge comes at the cost of everything I thought I was building for.